Hey there students, this is Mr. Sharp here, starting off our first video in our session of lecture videos that will encompass our American History 1 course. Myself and the other American History 1 teachers are going to share with you guys all the videos that introduce each topic here. And I'm going to introduce the first topic, Unit 1, Colonization, to you. And you can feel free to stop this video at any time to repeat something or stop to take notes and prepare for the quizzes. So in Unit 1, we're going to talk a lot about European exploration and the start up to everything leading up to the American Revolution. However, I want you guys to think about this one central question. Why do people move? Why do you have to move whenever your parents tell you we're going to move to a new state? Or why do we have to move whenever you want to go on vacation? So through voluntary and involuntary means, people from the old world, Europe and Africa, had to make their way over the Atlantic Ocean to North America. And why was that? This is going to be our main essential question for this unit. So let's go ahead and move forward. There's me. The standards that we're going to hit in this unit, in this lesson today, are going to deal with the review of European exploration and also the main motives for American colonization in North America, primarily through English colonization. There he goes. All right, let's go. As many of you are already aware, many of the settlements that were made by the English in North America happened at or after 1607. However, in this picture right here, I want to show you, this is a picture that was depicted of an event that happened in 1602, just 5 years before Jamestown was ever established, where European explorers come to what's now Massachusetts Bay Colony and trade with the Wamapoke Indians. So we can see that colonization didn't happen just overnight. There were a lot of different motives for Europeans to come and interact with the natives and interact with the people who were already living in North America. It wasn't just to create colonies. It was about money. It was about trying to gain wealth. And that's depicted here. As you can see on the screen here, what I'm doing is I'm going to share the note shells that I give to all my students. You guys are able to follow this as you see fit. Pause the video whenever you need to, but we're going to go ahead and talk about our first daily warm-up here. And I'm going to give you guys a quick recap of what you learned in 7th grade social studies. There's 3 G's of exploration. That first one being gold. Europeans mainly wanted a new wealth of income when it comes to exploration. Not only just to find new trade routes to Asia, but to increase their wealth by gaining the natural resources and the raw materials that came from North and South America to come to Europe and make those into luxury goods to increase their nation's income wealth. In addition to that, God, or religious purposes. What better way to share your faith than to go to other unknown places and to share the gospel with other people who never heard of that religion before? And the last one being glory. What were the political motives of Europeans to come and claim new lands to show, hey, we now have colonies in other parts of the world, so we have a lot of power. Those are the 3 G's to exploration that you guys remember from 7th grade social studies, but I want you to keep those in mind as we move forward and talk about mercantilism and triangle trade. So speaking of the age of exploration, to give you guys a brief recap of what you learned from 7th grade, we're going to talk very quickly about what those explorations looked like from 1440 all the way to 1600. So we know that primarily it started with Portugal as they became more obsessed with building maritime ships that would carry them across wide open oceans and eventually to the Spanish conquistadors all the way into Central and South America. So starting in 1440, as Portugal became more adaptive in building their ships called caravels that would take them across open oceans, they would find new trade routes to go along the western coast of Africa, all the way around the Horn of Africa to India. And this was the primary goal. And as new explorers tried to compete with them in order to find faster routes, they try to go through these canals here through the Mediterranean, but they're ultimately cut off by the Ottoman Empire. So what was the other alternative? Some explorers decided, hey, let's sail westward and figure out how to get to India faster. However, they never would have thought, and this all ended in 1492 with Christopher Columbus's 4 voyages to the West Indies, or what we now consider the Caribbean islands, that there's a huge landmass that is in the way of Europe and India. So this is ultimately going to start the rush of European nations to start colonizing all these lands in North and South America. As you can see right here, some of these routes that were taken during the early 1500s, primarily through Columbus's first 4 voyages, Magellan's expedition all the way across the world, and other explorers who try to go into the northern parts. So for North America's exploration, we see that it's primarily done through Spanish explorers, primarily in the southern regions of what we consider now the United States. Coming from the West Indies into Florida, they would have traveled mainly through the Louisiana swamps into the rivers, through Texas in the southeast or southwest, all the way into what we consider now Mexico. While you see on this other part, mostly French and English settlers and explorers settling out the lands of what we consider now Canada and New England. Not only that, Spain is going to become the most dominant power in the 1500s for exploring the new territories of North and South America. As you can see in yellow, Spain is going to not only hold a lot of land in Florida, which they would hold until the 1800s, but also Texas, all of the Yucatan Peninsula, and most of Western South America. They would have been cut off by Portugal, who had to essentially share South America because of a treaty that was signed by the Pope at the time, who said, okay, Portugal, you get one half, Spain, you get the other half. And this is why today Brazil is a mainly Portuguese-speaking nation, while most other South American nations speak Spanish. And we have evidence of this. We have evidence that Spain made a lot of these expeditions into that far into the North American continent because of Navajo Indians who lived in what's now considered modern-day New Mexico and Arizona had left us evidence of their drawings of Spanish explorers on horses going through their territory during the time. However, this is going to come at a cost to the people who are already living in those areas, primarily through disease. By the end of the 1600s, nearly 8 out of every 10 people native to North America after exploration would eventually die because of some European-born disease, primarily smallpox and various other diseases, even though that's going to be equally shared to Europeans who were coming over that time primarily through syphilis. It's not as devastating as it was to Native Americans who suffered this. And this is primarily why the European explorers were successful at exploring the lands they did, because most Native Americans wouldn't meet their fate at disease more so than by the sword or by the gun. Okay, so as a recap for the different nations that would explore these territories in North and South America, we're going to see that Spain, their expeditions mainly dealt in the western and southern regions of the North American continent, and they were primarily focused on expanding military territory, not necessarily for building permanent settlements, and they also wanted to expand Christianity through missions. And for France, their lands would be based primarily in Canada and the northwestern territories, like in the Hudson Bay River and the Great Lakes. Their settlements were very few in number, and they were mainly to support fur traders, merchants, and also Catholic missionaries to help convert the native population. While England, on the other hand, they would come later in the game in 1607 in the failed attempts of the late 1500s. Their attempts would be made primarily to make permanent English settlements for profit and to allow religious freedom for people who sought refuge in North America. You would also see a small movement of Dutch come to the Hudson area and to create what we now consider today New York, New York. Remember, anything that's highlighted in yellow should be written down. It's going to be important. And here's a map to depict the areas that would be explored by those different European explorers, primarily in the later parts of the game, in the late 1500s all the way to 1625. As you can see here in Florida and parts of Georgia, it's mainly Spanish colonies, while in this part we see there's a few yellow English settlements like the Roanoke and Jamestown, Plymouth, and up in the Northern Territories, French settlements. So now let's talk about the big things we're going to discuss in this class. As you guys go through your notes today, feel free to look at the videos that I've attached, but I'm going to explain them to you here. So the name of the game for these three nations, the big three, France, England, and Spain, was all about mercantilism. It's the economic idea that they can gain power through economic competition with each other. So the idea is that each of these three nations would establish colonies in the New World in order to obtain the resources needed to ship over to ship over to Europe and turn those raw materials into finished goods and luxury items that would be ultimately be given to settlements and other areas in West Africa and be sold. They would sell these luxury goods like furniture, guns, and fine arts like china and jewelry. They would give these items and sell them in order to exchange for slaves. These African slaves would then be purchased and shipped to the colonies, where those would further help advantage the Europeans who would be yet again obtaining resources, natural resources from the colonies, ship them to England, create luxury goods, sell them to West Africa, and bring the profits of which they would eventually turn into the profits and purchase slaves, bring them into the New World, and the cycle repeats again and again. So this was the main name of the game, and it was all about benefiting the mother country, as you can see in this depiction right here. It's all about benefiting the mother country, which would have been either England or France or Spain. And this is what's going to create what we call, and guys can see our notes here, and you can follow along with them as you can pause the video to record the notes that you've seen from the video so far. Let's talk our last bit about the triangle trade, or the transatlantic trade. As you're following along with our notes, as I said, you can take a look at the videos as needed. But what this system of mercantilism is going to trade is a network that looks like a triangle of trade. And as you can see, the natural resources that came from the Americas that are not native to Europe or Asia or Africa would come over and create a biodiverse world that we live in today. Could you imagine Italians making pizza when they didn't even have tomatoes? This is a product of the triangle trade. Or if the Native Americans would be able to fend off European explorers, they would have been able to do so if it hadn't have been for the diseases that were brought over by European explorers. So our last section in our notes, guys, as you are following with this, I want you to make sure that you go back and watch the video and start plugging in the different items that you found from the video that can be put into this map. And this would be the last part of your notes for mercantilism and triangle trade. I'm going to leave this up here for our last bit on this video so you can start plugging in some things. But remember, it's the raw materials and unfinished goods that would be brought from the colonies to the mother country, where they can be turned into luxury items. They would be brought down to Africa, where they would be sold in the purchase of slaves, which would then been brought to what we call the Middle Passage into the West Indies, into the colonies, and from there be traded along into this triangular trade route. As you guys can see, there's a few other arrows that are pointing in this, and I want you guys to record these as you go along. And with that, this will end our first video, and I hope you join me again next time for a second video about Jamestown. I'll see you then.